The ridge at Vale Kos, the Korvathi had a saying, passed down through 17 generations of their warrior caste: he who does not fear death has already died inside. It was a philosophy forged in blood and starfire, born from a species that had conquered 11 systems before humanity had learned to split the atom. They believed they understood war. They believed they had catalogued every form of courage, every shade of bravery, every flavor of recklessness the galaxy had to offer. They had never met Sergeant First Class Dominic Arevalo. The ridge at Vale Kos was a miserable stretch of rock and red dust on the third moon of a dying gas giant in the outer arm of the Kepler expanse. It smelled like sulfur and burned circuitry. The gravity was a touch heavier than Earth standard, which meant every step required 8% more effort, every breath dragged a little harder, and every load felt like it was packed with lead. The Terran 9th Rapid Response had been holding the ridge for 11 days. 11 days without proper resupply. 11 days of rationed water, recycled air from portable scrubbers, and sleep measured in 40-minute intervals between bombardment cycles. The Korvathi wanted the ridge because it sat above the only viable hyperspace relay station in the sector. Whoever controlled Vale Kos controlled communications for a 30-light-year radius. Strategically, it was irreplaceable. Tactically, it was a nightmare, a narrow spine of elevated rock flanked on both sides by sheer drops into methane fog banks below. There was no flanking. There was no going around. There was only forward and back, and the 9th Rapid Response was very specifically in the business of not going back. Dominic had been on the ridge since day 2. He'd arrived with a 12-man fire team and, through the particular math of sustained combat, he now had 5. Corporal Una Brash crouched to his left, her battle rifle slung across her forearms, eyes moving in slow professional sweeps across the kill zone. Private Osei Addo was on the right, youngest of the group at 19, quiet now in the way that soldiers get quiet after they've seen enough. Specialist Reina Castillo managed the fire support terminal 30 meters back, calling in orbital adjustments when the window opened. And Sergeant Mbeki ran rear security, which was a polite way of saying he watched the direction they weren't looking. 5 soldiers. Roughly 300 meters of ridge to hold. And on the morning of day 11, the Korvathi sent their Wrath-class shock infantry up the southern approach in force. The shape of stillness Dominic saw them first. The Korvathi Wrath-class were not subtle. They stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, built like architecture rather than biology, broad-shouldered, triple-jointed limbs, carapace plating that had evolved over millennia to deflect both blade and beam. Their sensory clusters were located along the dorsal ridge of their skulls, giving them a field of vision that made ambush nearly impossible. They communicated through subsonic pulses that their entire body could generate and receive simultaneously. They did not have blind spots. They did not have weak sides. Everything about them had been refined by evolution and then further refined by war. There were 43 of them. Dominic counted twice. He clicked his comms twice, the signal for contact, hold fire, and pressed himself flat against the rock shelf he'd been using as cover for 3 days. The Wrath moved in their characteristic 3-column formation, the lead element probing forward while the flanking columns maintained suppression angles. It was textbook. It was efficient. It was exactly what the Korvathi tactical manual specified for a linear terrain assault against a dug-in position of unknown strength. What the Korvathi tactical manual did not account for was Dominic's patience. He lay still, not crouched flat. His cheek rested against the stock of his modified Kessler pattern directed energy rifle, a weapon the armory crew had nicknamed Threadneedle for its abnormally tight beam focus. His breathing was slow. His heart rate was, by any measure that the Korvathi biometric scanners at their range would have registered, almost insultingly relaxed. 30 meters out, Una watched him and said nothing. She had served with Dominic for 4 years. She knew what that stillness meant. It was not calm, it was compression, like a spring wound so tight that it had gone quiet. The Korvathi lead element was 40 meters out when Dominic identified the formation's command node. Korvathi assault columns always traveled with a battle thought coordinator, a specialist who managed the subsonic communication network that kept the formation cohesive. Kill the coordinator, and the formation fractured into independent actors. 43 became 43 separate problems rather than one organism. The coordinator was in the center column, third from the front. Distinguished by the secondary antenna array mounted above its primary sensory cluster and the faintly different rhythm of its movement, it paused a half-second longer than the others at each position, processing, relaying, maintaining the web. Dominic watched it for 90 seconds. The Corvathy closed to 30 meters. Then 25. He did not blink. The coordinator paused at a natural defilade position, a low boulder that offered partial cover and would have been, for any other combatant in the galaxy, the obvious place to stop and coordinate. The Corvathy coordinator settled into it with the confidence of a being that had never once had its tactics fail at this stage of an assault. Dominic's trigger pull was measured in fractions. The Threadneedle's beam was narrow enough to thread between the boulder's edge and the coordinator's antenna array and catch the base of its sensory cluster at an angle the carapace plating simply wasn't positioned to absorb. The coordinator dropped without a sound. The formation stopped. For exactly 4 seconds, 42 Wraith-class shock infantry stood in their columns without orders, their subsonic networks suddenly silent, every sensory cluster rotating, searching, trying to re-establish contact with the command node that had simply ceased to exist. 4 seconds is a very long time. Dominic was already moving. What humans do. He did not charge them. Charging 42 Wraith-class anything was not tactics, it was theater, and theater got people killed. What Dominic did was something the Corvathy had no entry for in their manual. He maneuvered. He was on his feet and 6 meters to the left before the formation recovered, using the fractional delay in their coordination to slide into a lateral firing position that exposed the column's flank. 2 more shots. The Threadneedle was not a rapid-fire weapon. It recharged between shots, but Dominic timed each shot to the beat of the enemy's reorganization. Every time the remaining subcommanders tried to establish a new command pulse, he fired at the source of that pulse. He was not trying to kill 42 soldiers. He was trying to kill the formation's ability to think. Yuna understood without being told. She had shifted position too, keeping the lead element engaged just enough, quick, disciplined shots that forced cover without committing to a firefight she couldn't win alone. She was buying Dominic 2 seconds at a time, and 2 seconds was exactly what he needed. To say the youngest did something remarkable. Entirely on his own initiative, without orders, he moved to the far right edge of the ridge and began placing suppressive bursts into the methane fog bank below the southern approach, not because anything was there, but because the sound and energy signature would register on Corvathy sensors as a secondary position. A ghost unit. He made himself sound like 6 soldiers. He made 5 people sound like 20. It was, Dominic would later write in his after-action report, outstanding tactical creativity under pressure. In the moment, he registered it only as another variable working in his favor, and he used it. The Corvathy assault fractured. Without a functioning command node, the columns broke into their individual element leaders, and those element leaders made conflicting decisions. The left column tried to push forward. The right column halted to provide covering fire. The center column, leaderless, disoriented, confused by the ghost signals from Osei's position, began to pull back to regroup. A formation that pulls back is a formation that has decided not to win. Dominic let them pull back 40 meters, then he made them stop doing even that. He found a shallow depression in the rock, barely enough to lie prone, and settled into it at the ridge's natural choke point. The Corvathy left column, still pushing forward, was now isolated from the rest of the formation by their own retreat. They were 12 soldiers moving toward a ridge held by what their sensors told them was at least 1 fire team on the left, a fire team on the right, and a sniper who had somehow killed their coordinator from cover they couldn't locate. What their sensors did not tell them was that the fire team on the left was 1 corporal and the fire team on the right was 1 private who had never fired his weapon in anger before day 2 of this posting. The left column halted 30 meters from Dominic's position. He could see them clearly. They were magnificent, in the way that apex predators are magnificent, powerful, precise, every movement economical. The element leader communicated in quick subsonic bursts to its remaining 11. They were trying to re-establish contact with the center column. They were trying to understand what they were facing. Dominic let them wonder for 11 seconds. He counted. He needed them still, and the uncertainty was doing that work for him. Then Castillo's voice came over comms from the fire support terminal, quiet and professional. Orbital window in 40 seconds. I have a solution for the center and right columns. Left column is too close to our position. Confirmed, Dominic said. Left column is mine. Fire on your solution. Copy. He waited for the orbital strike to hit, not because he needed the distraction, but because the concussive event would degrade the Corvathy sensory clusters for 1.2 seconds post-detonation. Standard effect. Documented in captured Corvathy field manuals. A 1.2-second window of degraded perception across the entire formation. The strike came down on the center and right columns like a hammer made of light. In the 1.2 seconds that followed, Dominic put 6 shots into the left column's element leader and the 2 soldiers flanking him. 3 shots on the recharge cycle, 6, counting each side. He moved between each shot. He was never where he'd been when the previous shot fired. The remaining 9 Reth-class soldiers of the left column were now leaderless, isolated, cut off from their formation by 60 meters, and the remains of what orbital fire support had done to the center and right. With a sniper they could not locate and could not predict firing at a rate that shouldn't have been possible from a single weapon platform. They retreated. All 9 of them. They retreated off the ridge. Down the southern approach. Back into the lowlands below Veilkos, where their command would have to explain to the Corvathy High Warmaster why 43 Reth-class shock infantry had failed to take a ridge held by 5 Terrans. The ridge was quiet for a long time. Dominic lay in his shallow depression for 6 minutes after the last Corvathy sensor signature cleared the approach, waiting. He was not dramatic about it. He wasn't breathing hard. His hands were steady on the thread needle. When he finally rose to his knees and clicked comms, clear, consolidate, his voice was the same pitch and pace it always was. Una found him first. She looked at him for a moment, then looked at the approach, then back at him. She had seen a lot of combat in 4 years. She had worked with a lot of soldiers. 43, she said. 42 after the first shot, Dominic said. The rest is just math. Osei appeared from the right edge, his weapon slung, his expression somewhere between disbelief and a kind of stunned pride. He was young enough that his hands were shaking, though not from fear, from the release of adrenaline that the human body dumps after it has operated at full emergency capacity. He would learn, in time, to metabolize that faster. For now, he just stood at the ridge's edge and looked out over the approach at the evidence of what had happened and said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. Sergeant Mbeki came up from rear security. He looked at the approach. He looked at Dominic. He nodded once, which was everything. Castillo's voice came over comms from the fire terminal. Command is asking for a status report. Tell them the approach is clear, Dominic said. He was already moving back to his position on the ridge, checking the threadneedle's charge, scanning the far edge of the approach for any secondary elements. Tell them we'll need resupply before the next cycle. Tell them we're still here. That's all. That's everything. The Corvathy High Warmaster received the battle report 6 hours later. 43 Reth-class shock infantry, the finest close assault soldiers in the Corvathy military tradition, repelled from a narrow ridge by a force of 5. The report noted the use of orbital fire support, 1 strike against the center and right columns, and the confirmed kill of the battle thought coordinator in the engagement's opening seconds. It noted the ghost position deception on the right flank that had confused the formation's sensor picture. It noted that 9 survivors of the left column could not confirm the size of the Terran position, could not identify the primary shooter's location, and could not explain how a single weapon platform had fired at the rate the engagement log suggested. The Warmaster read the report twice. Then it called in its senior tactical analysts. For 4 hours, they reviewed the engagement data, the subsonic communication logs from the surviving Corvathy, the orbital strike timing, the sequence of leadership eliminations. At the end of 4 hours, one of the analysts said, very quietly, the human shot first and did not stop. He moved every time. He knew where our mind was, every step. The Warmaster was silent for a long moment. Understood, it said finally. Mark Veilcoss as a sustained siege objective. We will not send assault elements again without a full company minimum, close air support, and pre-mission electromagnetic suppression. A full company. Close air support. Pre-mission electromagnetic suppression. Against a ridge held by 5. In the Korvathi tactical database, next to the entry for Veilcoss, a notation was added. It was brief. It did not attempt to explain. It only recorded what the sensors and the survivors had confirmed. Human soldier. Did not blink. Did not move until movement served purpose. Enemy did not stand again. Dominic Arevalo spent that night on the ridge, watching the approach, listening to the methane winds roll up from the fog banks below. He ate a ration bar that tasted like cardboard and salt. He drank half his water allocation. He checked the thread needle's alignment, cleaned the bore, recharged the cell. Then he lay back down in his shallow depression, cheek against the stock, and watched the dark. The ridge was his. He intended to keep it.